Good afternoon, thank you very much. Can I have a show of hands those who've downloaded the paper that's for this presentation? Because like my predecessor Mick Healy, there are a number of case studies there in detail in that paper which I only had a chance to briefly just give you a couple of glimpses at. So I recommend you, if you're interested, having a look at those case studies. So John asked us to have a little summary of what the paper is about. It's basically a policy and position paper, which is another polite way of saying that I've bravely introduced changes in programs and courses without much data to support it, and I'm hoping that I'll eventually have time to gather it. But at the moment, like my colleague who presented earlier from Chile, my students do enjoy my work, and I'll show you that at least 25% have agreed to participate in unassessed extra workload after they've graduated, to continue on this work. So I guess that speaks a little bit for itself. Okay, so the main points I'm trying to get over here is, in Australia we have the AQF, it's another framework, and most Australians here will be familiar with the AQF, which requires level 9, which is the Masters, in this case Masters coursework, like the Master of Business Administration, to have a Capstone research experience. And that was enforced on universities back in 2015, and most of the MBA programs I was involved with as the National Committee on the National Executive of the Graduate Management Association. Most MBA programs around Australia had little, if any, research component, let alone satisfying some of the requirements of that Capstone project. So I introduced this idea of using the research skills framework as a way of enabling students to understand how they could use research skills in complying with the Capstone requirement of the course, which was a strategic analysis of their own organisation, their strategy of the MBA. So there were twofold benefits for them. They actually got to canvass and showcase their ability in a strategic analysis to their CEOs, but they also, of course, got to then integrate as a capstone all the material for their MBA to consolidate that in terms of their completion of their degree. So the other thing I found over 30 years I've been using goal attainment scale as a way of engaging with various participants. It's a self-determined process for identifying potential outcomes in qualitative terms, but mapping them onto a 5-point rating scale so that academics and others can actually piggyback on the experience that people have of setting and monitoring their own goals to enable us to actually gather some quantitative data across individuals, across programs over time, which is not something you normally do with qualitative data. And I also, along the way, was inspired by John's Pentagon idea, and I actually started introducing that as a way of adapting in concise terms the idea of strategic thinking for our strategic capstone project for the MBA students, which I'll give as an example. What were the findings? Well, admittedly, these are qualitative anecdotal data, student examples at this stage, and I'm a year behind in collecting data because I've changed my job and left the MBA program. But students still bombard me with emails. I get several a year at least saying, well, hang on, why aren't you interviewing me and following up? And here's all the stuff I have. And I'd love to work with you and find out what this all means for my career. So goal attainment scaling was used actually very successfully in facilitating effectiveness. And I'll give you some examples of students. But because it wasn't assessed, the enthusiasm and the commitment to it petered out very quickly once they finished their capstone course and graduated and left. So only about 25% have continued on their participation. Nevertheless, those are still enthusiastic. As I said, I get emails from them, unsolicited emails from them. Despite the initial reluctance, some MBA students found the RSD actually as a gateway, as I think Mick was saying, it was a threshold concept for them, to actually get them to think broadly about it. I'll give a case study of that shortly. And also, the anecdotal consultation with students actually gives us thought that this RSD idea of adapting it towards a strategic framework for strategic thinking is actually quite a worthwhile enterprise. So let's just refresh ourselves what the students actually take on when they are enrolled in an MBA program. At the end of it, they're meant to be able to develop principles and methods of research, reporting and evaluation and decision making applicable to organisational management. A lot of them didn't sign on for that. they've signed on to get a nice piece of paper that's going to actually add to their career, maybe help them to exit what their job they're in and go into consulting work. We've actually required them to actually do a substantial research project. And that's something actually is a very heavy workload. When they're already working as senior managers, they have a 5 years experience as managers before they get into the MBA program. So they're actually now executives in a way. So there's a lot of workload, plus juggling family, for them then to take on a critical analysis of their own organisation and a research project and put out a formal report, a 3,000 word report with sundry appendices. It's a lot of work. So that's what we've asked them to do, and a lot of them find it quite daunting. So what did I actually help them with? I introduced the Research Skills Framework as a vehicle for the Capstone project, but in fact what I wanted to do was to see whether or not, well, I presume the RSD framework could help them because it's a research compliant. They had to do a research project. What I found was that they actually wanted something to encapsulate their whole MBA and the strategic thinking. So I helped develop the Pentagon a bit and got some anecdotal involvement of students in how that might work as a useful summary of what we're doing with the course. Goal attainment scaling is a standard on its own. It's been around since 1968. It was developed by Tom Kirasuk in Minnesota, and unfortunately he's passed away, but his book I highly recommend to you. By the way, I'm not going to talk about the e-portfolio because we didn't have much success in dealing with that. As an engagement tool, I'm sure it has potential, but it didn't really catch on that well. So Tom Kirasuk and his colleagues Aaron Smith and Joe Cardillo put out this book in '94 with many different examples of application of how to engage participants in setting their own goals and monitoring and evaluating their own progress towards their own goals in life, especially in psychiatric rehabilitation and in education. So what we found is that the typical acronym that we want to impart to students, especially in MBA programs or evidence-based programs, is how do they produce smart objectives, so there's specific, monitorable, attainable, realistic, and time-referenced goal-setting tools. And goal attainment scaling embodies that because it's actually more than most people when they set up a SMART goal. They don't know what to do with this measurement bit. The goal attainment scaling enables them to articulate their goals in potential outcome statements that may be fairly vague, but the key is, can we then order them around a 5-point scale? And the scale looks something like this: expected outcome, more than, much more than, less than, and much less than. So, of course, like anything else, I'm a snake oil salesman, but I have to recognise my own limitations, and goal attainment scaling has been criticised a lot as very subjective, highly relative to a person's own context. But there's some of the actually important factors in engagement, because they are so subjective, they are so particular to the context of the individual, and they are the person's own goals. But we can aggregate them if we actually regularly set them into some grounded criteria by reference to objective results. If we get a global scaling or some of the rubrics assessment, if we consult the stakeholders and educate them, and also, most importantly, if we get them into a contractual arrangement to peer review and audit each other, then we've got as valid and reliable as any other measurement tool that you didn't want. So students were given the usual, this is an excerpt of the ethics requirements that they had to go through, which I'll skip. It's the typical ethics requirements disclosing the contribution that they are expected to make over a year follow-up after their work. So we had about 23% of those 68 in the final Capstone course. But then what I did was, as a basis of consultation with students, instead of loading up the Capstone with all the content about strategy and strategic management and doing a Capstone strategy project, we broke it down into 2 parts and put the strategic thinking part in the front end. So I then started teaching strategic thinking. So I've got 68 students at the end when they were doing the Capstone at the end of the project, and I've got 60 students who were participants when we brought the strategic thinking to the front end as the core front end course, and they all agreed to be following up. Unfortunately, I've only got 12 and 16 of those I've been able to follow up so far, and not all of them have been able to give me, because they actually quite significant number of them have made significant changes in their life and their workplace. These are MBA graduates and executives. One of them, for example, ended up being a regular contributor to the international company in New York, based here in Adelaide. So he was all over the place, trying to follow him up. Even though he was enthusiastic, it's quite difficult. Okay, so let's look at some examples. As I've said, this is one case of a design engineer, and I'll read that while you're having a look at his goal attainment scale, which I think you'll find interesting. Basically, he started out as a design engineer with a few staff. They were just working out ways in which to change the lighting to comply with the new, more efficient electricity usage. So there's no research component at all. It's applying a standard to modifying filaments and design of light in a little laboratory in Adelaide. Well, that company that he was working with got bought out by an Australian company, which was soon bought out during his MBA by an international company. And his Capstone requirement was to talk to his CEO about the strategic direction of the company. Now his CEO is in New York. As it happens, the CEO came to Melbourne and then to Sydney. He caught that CEO by email, interviewed him, and put forward some of the ideas about how RSD and the work skills development framework, which he started to use himself. Intuitively, out of his research, he saw work skills development framework could be useful in supervising his own staff. So here's an example of what his expected outcome would be to critically evaluate the match between theoretical and practical applications to generate knowledge and work independently to synthesize that. In fact, what he did was, in the time that I had with him and his job changes, he was able to then come back and say, I found this was very useful, and I can tick off that we've actually got more than expected outcome. Another example is this student actually was a finance executive, but he was involved in change management of a big banking complex. And he set a goal to apply RSD level 3, the scaffold placement top data. He said the data systems in his organisation were like batshit, and the goal attainment scaling was much more important and useful than anything else he'd come across. And so he introduced that along with the idea of strategic thinking in a number of change programs within his organisation in banking. And he was able to proudly say, not only has he done this, but he's able to rewrite the goals and set them goals further from the engagement he's had in using the RSD and goal attainment in a change management program in the bank. Now, these are two courageous examples, obviously not very positive ones to talk about, and there are others, but here's really what I wanted to leave us with, is how do we look at the framework that John helped us discover through his process in the core group in Adelaide. How can we actually reconceptualise and develop an engagement process around the thinking of the frameworks and the process? And this is where I found that the MBA students are most interested is, yes, okay, goal setting and strategy and all those things are all great, but what can I give as a quick example I can have readily available on my screensaver, or I can impart to my staff on how to encapsulate strategic thinking? And here it is, an adaptation of the Pentagon. So, obviously there are limitations. This is very much a limited anecdotal study, biased by the fact that I was program director and teaching the course, but since I've left, that hasn't stopped the students emailing me to continue the work. And so there's quite a lot of interest in where this is taking them. And of course, and in terms of discussion, what I'd really like to do is share with us what this means in terms of an engagement process. So here we have, for example, a small cohort of people who are ambitiously taking on the role of executives in their business and their organisations. What has research got to do with them? Well, in fact, it's just another way of them engaging in the process of change and engaging with the process of thinking strategically about their organisation. And most importantly, I found it's helping them with their career. Especially the goal attainment scale got them starting thinking about what they wanted to achieve. But the RSD helped them then to get a mechanism where they could improve their thinking about what they can achieve. Anyway, that's what I'd like to leave you with. If there are any issues you'd like to raise on that, I'm sure that we have a few moments to talk about. Thank you.